Okay, so we're going to talk about multiplying fractions, and the first thing we want to do is actually review what the fraction means. So looking specifically at 3/8, we remember that 3 is the numerator and 8 is the denominator, and so the denominator names the size piece, and the numerator counts or enumerates the number of pieces that we have. So in 3/8, we have that each thing is divided into 8 equal pieces. And each of those pieces is called an eighth of the thing. And then this notation we name as 3/8, and that is very descriptive of the fact that I have 3 of these eighths. Okay, so one thing that I want to kind of pay attention to is that this means that 3/8 is the same as 3 copies of 1/8, or 3 times 1/8. Okay, so I want to pay attention to this multiplication. Of course, that's what we're talking about today. And one of the things that we know is that multiplication is commutative, which means, for example, that like 7 times 2 is the same as 2 times 7. And so when we think about that, like, we know that 7 times 2 is the same as 2 times 7, and we can think of this multiplication as either 7 copies of 2 or 2 copies of 7. So coming back to 3/8 is the same as 3 times 1/8. This definition of the fraction really looks at this being 3 copies of 1/8. And I want to pull out the commutativity of multiplication and say we should also be able to think of this as 1/8 of a copy of 3. Okay, so 3 times 1/8 is the same, should be the same as 1/8 times 3, where one of these might be viewed as 3 copies of 1/8, and the other one might be viewed as 1/8 of a copy of 3. So that might be something along the lines of, if you knew what a length of 3 was, then we could take an eighth of that. I know I can take eighths by taking halves and halves and halves. And so whatever length 3 is, if I can divide that into 8 equal pieces, then that would mean 1/8 of 3 is that size piece. So I want you to take a moment to think about, like, it's a little bit hard to gather from this particular number line exactly how big 1/8 of 3 is, but I want you to take a moment to think about if there's a way that we could build a number line, and I have here basically a number line with blank ticks. How would we scale a number line so that we could determine exactly how big that little piece is that is 1/8 of 3 units long? I'm going to pause for a minute. I encourage you to pause for a minute and think about this. So one way to do this is to actually make sure that each unit of the 3 units is divided into 8 equal pieces. So I might start here with the 0 over here and say I'm going to make 8 tick marks be 1 unit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tick marks is 1 unit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tick marks is another unit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 tick marks for 3 units. And now I have actually a multiple of 8 as my number of tick marks, and going from 0 up to 3, I see there are 24 spaces here. And each space represents 1/8 of a unit. Okay, so since I now have, and that basically is just equivalent to saying 3 is the same as 24/8, which we know we know from our previous work with mixed numbers and fractions, and just even the definition of fractions. Okay, so if we want to know, so how do I divide these 3 units into 8 equal pieces? Well, now I can see these 3 units as 24 equal pieces, and I can divide 24 into 8 equal pieces. So 24 divided into 8 equal pieces is 3 spaces per piece. So that means if I go every 3 units, every 3 spaces, and tick that off, then that means I will be dividing my 3 units into 8 equal pieces. Okay, so I have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 3 divided into 8 equal pieces. And that tells me that each of those pieces is 1/8 of 3 units. Okay, and looking at this, now we can actually see precisely how big 1/8 of 3 is. We remember that each of those spaces represents 1/8 of a unit, and I have 3 of those spaces here. So this is the marker of 3/8. Okay, so we see here that this equality holds. 3 copies of 1/8 is the same as 1/8 of a copy of 3. Okay, I want to draw another picture that just kind of re-emphasizes this fact. Because what we did here is we really divided 3 into 8 equal parts. So this actually shows, let me get my blue back. This actually shows that 1/8 of 3 is the same thing as 3 divided by 8. Okay, and this is also the same thing as 3/8. Okay, so now we actually have this meaning of this fraction, that this fraction also means 3 divided by 8. And I want to kind of go back to our previous meaning of this division is, well, there's a couple ways that we can see this. One is, and one of them is, what if you divide 3 things among 8 people so that each person gets an equal share, how much does each person get? And you could imagine if you had 3 pizzas divided among 8 people. Well, it's kind of hard to divide 3 things into 8 pieces unless you first start by dividing each thing into 8 pieces. So luckily pizzas are often divided into eighths. And this is exactly how I started out on the number line, is I started with each unit divided into 8 equal pieces. And now we could imagine if each person was chose to take 1 piece from each pizza, they would get their fair share, and they would end up having 3/8 of a pizza altogether. Okay, and you can color 8 different colors here. Each color would take 3/8 of a pizza, and you can put them on 3 different pizzas, or you can put them on all stacked together against one pizza. Okay, so this is pretty cool, and it actually brings in here that we can also think of 3/8 as 3 divided by 8. Okay. Or 1/8 of 3. All right. And this 3, the bullet point above it is, I want to remind you, this is the same as 3 times 1/8. That's 3 copies of 1/8. Okay, so I want you to take a moment to think about this, because there's actually a lot going on in these pictures, and pause the video and think a lot about give yourself a little bit of time to think about these concepts, because it is kind of twisting your perspective back and forth across a couple of different concepts.